The limousine glided down Fifth Avenue just after dawn, its tinted windows reflecting the golden glow of the rising sun. Inside, billionaire Nathaniel Cole reviewed the final notes for a meeting that could seal a multi-billion-dollar merger in Tokyo. His world was one of precision timing and flawless control. But all of that shattered in a single heartbeat when the car screeched to a stop. Standing in the middle of the street were two little girls, identical ragged, clutching each other's hands, and in their trembling grasp a faded photograph. Sir One whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city. "Could you write a letter to our mom in heaven? We don't know how to write." Nathaniel looked down at the photo and froze. His face went pale. His hand shook. And then the impossible happened, his eyes filled with tears. Who was this woman in the picture? And why did the sight of her break a billionaire? If this moment shocked you, stay with me because the truth behind that photo will change everything. Have you ever kept a promise so long ago, or broken one you can never forget? Share your answer below, because Nathaniel's story may echo your own. The driver muttered in confusion, but Nathaniel was no longer listening. The girls stood as still as statues in the morning, chill, their oversized coats frayed at the edges, their shoes barely holding together. They could not have been more than 6 years old. New York is no stranger to hardship, but seeing two children face a limousine with such quiet determination was something else entirely. He stepped out, adjusting the cuff of his suit as if armor might steady his shaking heart. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. The smaller girl answered with startling clarity, "Our mom is in heaven." The words hit Nathaniel like a blow, stirring a memory he thought he had buried decades ago. The other child, her eyes heavier, added, "We just need help. You look kind." It was the sincerity in her voice, the sheer vulnerability that cracked the wall Nathaniel had built around himself. He glanced at his watch. He had 15 minutes before the driver would start insisting they continue. The deal waiting in Tokyo was the culmination of years of strategy. But something told him this morning would not follow the rules of wealth and power. What kind of help, he asked, though his chest already ached with the answer. The girl with the backpack pulled out a tattered notebook and held it up with both hands. "Please write to our mom," she whispered. The simplicity of the request stunned him. In a city where strangers asked for money, opportunity, or favors, these children asked only for words. Words meant for someone who would never read them. Nathaniel hesitated. It was absurd. He had no time. Yet, when the other girl pressed the photograph into his hand, something shifted. He unfolded it, and for an instant the world stopped. The face that looked back at him was not just familiar, it was unforgettable. Clara Jennings, a girl from his past. A girl he once owed everything to. His vision blurred, his throat tightened, and before he could stop himself, a tear slipped down his cheek. "You knew her?" the smaller child asked, tilting her head. Nathaniel couldn't answer. The rush of memory was too strong. Clara, laughing under the summer sun. Clara sharing food when he had none. Clara believing in him when no one else did. And now she was gone, leaving behind these daughters with the same piercing eyes. Minnie Hook. Here the shock wasn't just recognition. It was guilt. The city roared around them, taxis honking, commuters hurrying, yet in that moment there was only silence. The children watched him closely as if they sensed he carried a piece of their mother inside him. Nathaniel forced himself to speak, his voice breaking. "We were friends a long time ago." The girl's eyes widened, hope flickering where sorrow had lived too long. "Then maybe you can help us," one said quickly. "She always told us an angel would come." Her words cut through him, leaving him shaken. He had never been called an angel. His world was one of ruthless boardrooms, cold skyscrapers, and deals inked in steel. But now, kneeling on a New York sidewalk with two little girls holding a photo of Clara Jennings, Nathaniel realized he faced the most important decision of his life. The driver coughed nervously. Time was slipping away. Tokyo waited. Investors waited. The empire he had built waited. Yet Nathaniel knew as sure as the morning sun that his life had just veered off its carefully charted course. These children weren't asking for money or privilege. They were asking for a letter to heaven for proof that love still lingered beyond loss. And in that fragile request lay a truth he could no longer ignore. Sometimes the most shocking moments aren't about power or wealth. They're about promises broken, remembered, or waiting to be kept. What would you have done if you were Nathaniel? Would you walk away or would you write? Nathaniel Cole returned to his penthouse that evening with the photograph burning a hole in his pocket. The laughter of Wall Street traders and the flashing screens of global markets meant nothing compared to the image that had nearly brought him to his knees on a New York sidewalk. Clara Jennings. Her name rose in his chest like a hymn he had not sung in decades. He poured himself a drink, but the whiskey did nothing to dull the rush of memories. Instead, the glass trembled in his hand as he allowed himself for the first time in years to remember. He had been a boy in Chicago, skinny from hunger, and bruised from nights that should never have belonged to a child. His father's anger was a storm that broke without warning, and his mother, too tired and too broken, could not shield him. Nathaniel grew up learning silence, learning how to disappear before the belt came down. But there was one place where the world softened the modest house across the street where Clara lived. She was just a neighbor's daughter, yet to Nathaniel she was the lifeline that kept him from drowning. He remembered a freezing winter afternoon, his jacket too thin against the wind. He had hidden behind the school gym to avoid going home nursing a split lip. Clara found him there. She didn't ask questions. She simply pulled out half of her sandwich wrapped in wax paper and pressed it into his hand. "Eat," she insisted, and when he resisted out of pride, she smiled and said, "My mom always packs too much." He knew she was lying, but the kindness disarmed him. That was Clara, gentle yet fierce, willing to fight the darkness with nothing more than stubborn light. Over time, their friendship grew in the quiet corners of hardship. Clara was the one who showed him how to check out books from the library, how to lose himself in stories when reality was unbearable. She scribbled math formulas in the margins of her notebook, sliding it across the table when he pretended not to care about school. "You're smarter than you think," she'd whisper. He never believed her, but he tried because she believed enough for both of them. On nights when he ran from home, it was Clara who left the garage unlocked, a blanket waiting in the corner. Her presence meant safety in a world where safety was rare. Nathaniel had promised her once in the kind of vow only desperate teenagers make. They were sitting under a cracked streetlight, the city noise muffled by snow. She was shivering, and he had just confessed he wanted to escape to build a life where no one could ever touch him again. Clara looked at him with those steady eyes and said, "Don't forget where you came from." He had grabbed her hand, small and cold, in his and swore, "I'll never let you go without." It was a promise carved into the marrow of his bones, one he had repeated to himself whenever fear threatened to consume him. Yet life has a way of testing promises until they break. When Nathaniel earned a scholarship to Harvard, Clara was the one who pushed him to go. She had smiled through tears and told him, "This is your chance. Don't waste it." At first, he called her every week, telling her about professors, about the strange world of privilege he had stepped into. But as the years rolled on, the calls grew fewer. Success consumed him. He told himself he was too busy, that Clara understood. By the time he had built Cole Industries into a name whispered with awe in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo, their connection had vanished into silence. The last letter she had sent him, yellowed now, with age, still sat in the bottom of a cedar box he hadn't opened in years. In it, she wrote, "I always knew you'd change the world. I'm proud of you, Nate." He never wrote back. Now, staring at her photograph, the weight of his failure crushed him. Clara Jennings had died at 34 from pneumonia, something that could have been treated, something he could have paid for 100 times over without blinking. Yet she never asked him, and he never thought to look back. And now her daughters, Grace and Lily, were left with nothing but a faded photo and a belief that their mother was watching from the sky. Nathaniel pressed the picture against his chest, the tear tracks on his face no longer hidden. He whispered her name into the silence, as if the walls of his penthouse could carry it to heaven. Clara, the girl who had once been his shield, was gone. But her children had found him. And in their eyes he saw not just her memory, but the promise he had broken. The ghosts of his past refused to let him rest. Every corner of his home felt sterile, mocking. The polished marble, the crystal chandeliers, the art on the walls, none of it meant a thing compared to the memory of a girl who had once given him half a sandwich. That night, Nathaniel opened the cedar chest buried deep in his closet. He unfolded the letters, reread the clippings she had saved of his success. Every word screamed of devotion, of faith that never wavered, and guilt, sharp as glass, cut through him with each line. He had abandoned the one person who had taught him how to hope. When dawn came, Nathaniel had not slept. He looked out at the Manhattan skyline, his reflection a stranger in the glass. Clara was gone, but her daughters were still here. Grace and Lily. They carried her eyes, her courage, her quiet strength. They had stood in the middle of a street, fearless, holding a photograph that tethered him to the boy he once was. And Nathaniel knew with aching certainty that fate had brought them to him for a reason. He could not rewrite the past, but he could honor it. He could not save Clara, but he could save them. This time he would not walk away. This time he would keep his promise. Nathaniel Cole had spent his life mastering the art of control. Every deal, every boardroom, every decision in his empire was a matter of precision. But walking behind Grace and Lily through the cracked stairwell of their Brooklyn apartment building, he felt more out of place than he had ever been in a room full of billionaires. The walls smelled faintly of mildew, the banisters worn smooth by decades of weary hands. The girls moved quickly, their small shoes tapping against the concrete, and Nathaniel followed in silence, unsure what he was about to find. When they reached their door, Grace pushed it open with both hands. The apartment was dim, the curtains drawn against the cold. A single lamp flickered near the couch where Mrs. Aldridge, the elderly neighbor, sat knitting. She looked up startled at the sight of Nathaniel's tailored suit against the peeling paint of her living room. "Mr. Cole, is it?" she asked, with a voice both wary and tired. "I've been keeping an eye on them since their mama passed. It's not easy at my age, but I couldn't let them go hungry." Her eyes softened as she glanced at the twins. "They're good girls. They just need more than I can give." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He had built skyscrapers, orchestrated mergers worth billions, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the sight of two children making a home out of so little. A box of cereal sat half empty on the counter, a single blanket folded neatly on the couch where they slept together for warmth. Grace carefully placed her backpack on a chair, pulling out the notebook filled with letters they had written to heaven. Each page was covered in drawings of clouds and stick figures Clara's memory captured in crayons. Lily brought out a small stuffed bunny missing one ear and set it beside the notebook as if introducing an honored guest. "This is Mr. Buttons," she said seriously. "He keeps us safe at night." Nathaniel knelt to meet her eyes. "Does he do a good job?" he asked. Lily nodded solemnly, clutching the toy close. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something inside him break open. This was not charity. This was responsibility. These were Clara's daughters, living in shadows when they deserved the sun. The following morning, instead of heading to his office, Nathaniel took the girls to a small diner on Flatbush Avenue. The waitress raised an eyebrow when he slid into the booth in his navy suit with two children in mismatched coats. "What'll it be?" she asked, pen poised. Grace studied the menu like it was written in another language, then whispered, "Can we share pancakes?" Nathaniel shook his head gently. "No sharing today. You each get your own." When the plates arrived, the twins' eyes widened at the stack of pancakes drizzled with syrup. Lily ate slowly, savoring each bite. Grace tucked two pancakes into a napkin and slipped them into her backpack. Nathaniel caught her in the act, but said nothing. He remembered too well what it felt like to save food for later, because later was never guaranteed. That afternoon, he took them to the public library. The children moved through the aisles like explorers in a hidden world. Grace ran her fingers across the spines of books, pausing at titles about angels and faraway lands. Lily wandered into the children's section, pointing out every picture book with mothers in them. Nathaniel watched as they curled up in chairs too big for their small bodies, reading aloud to each other in halting voices. It struck him that Clara had taught them resilience even in her absence. They had built rituals of hope, letters to heaven, books about angels saving food like treasures, small shields against the loneliness of losing her. Later that week, back at their apartment, Mrs. Aldridge handed Nathaniel a worn journal. Clara wanted them to have this when they were older. "Maybe you should read it now." He opened the cover and found Clara's handwriting neat, steady, unwavering. Each entry was a love letter to her daughters. She wrote about their first steps, their laughter, the way they held hands even in sleep. And scattered among the entries were lines about him. She had clipped articles about his company, tucked them between pages, scribbled notes in the margins. Nate always was destined for more. "I hope he's happy." One line stopped him cold. "If I ever can't be here, I pray someone will remember the promise we once made." He closed the journal, his vision blurring. Clara had believed in him until her last breath. She had trusted him even when he had forgotten her. And now these girls were living proof of that faith. The weight of his empire pressed down on him. His board had already called twice, furious about the meeting he had canceled. They warned him the deal in Tokyo was collapsing without his presence. Investors demanded answers. Yet, sitting in a cramped Brooklyn living room with Grace drawing clouds and Lily braiding Mrs. Aldridge's yarn into makeshift bracelets, Nathaniel knew no deal, no empire could outweigh this moment. As he tucked the girls into bed that night, Grace whispered, "Mom said an angel would come. Maybe it's you." The words stunned him. Nathaniel had spent his life being called ruthless, brilliant, relentless, but never an angel. He smoothed the blanket over her small frame, his throat tightening. He could not bring Clara back, but perhaps he could honor her faith. Standing at the window, later watching the Brooklyn skyline shimmer under the night, Nathaniel realized that his life had split into two paths. One led back to his empire, to the world of contracts and skyscrapers. The other led to Grace and Lily, to a life of uncertainty and responsibility he had never imagined for himself. The choice was clear, though it terrified him. For the first time, Nathaniel understood that his true wealth wasn't measured in billions. It was measured in promises kept in love, given in the chance to rewrite a past scarred by regret. And as the girls slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Nathaniel Cole made a vow. He would not abandon them. He would not repeat his mistake. Clara had given him hope when he was a boy. Now it was his turn to give that same hope to her daughters. Nathaniel Cole had lived through hostile takeovers and global crises, but nothing compared to the storm he walked into when he tried to secure custody of Grace and Lily. His attorney, David Lawson, laid the facts out on the table with the bluntness of a man who knew the system all too well. "The courts don't care about your wealth, Nathaniel," he said. "They care about biology. If the father steps forward, they'll almost always give him priority unless we can prove he's unfit." The words landed like a stone in Nathaniel's chest. He had expected resistance, but hearing it out loud made the path ahead feel impossibly steep. For weeks, Nathaniel balanced late nights at the office with mornings braiding Lily's hair and evenings helping Grace with her homework. The girls clung to him, and he to them. Yet behind every tender moment loomed the fear that none of it would last. That fear became real the day Caleb Harlow resurfaced. He arrived not with apologies, but with threats. A man in his mid-30s, unshaven, with the restless eyes of someone who lived chasing shortcuts, Caleb confronted Nathaniel outside his Manhattan office. "Those girls are mine," he declared, his voice low but edged with menace. "You want to keep them, you'll have to pay me." Nathaniel's blood boiled. He wanted to knock the man down to make him understand what it meant to abandon children, but David intervened before it could escalate. "Let him talk," the lawyer whispered. "Every word is evidence." Caleb's demand was clear money in exchange for leaving Grace and Lily behind. It wasn't about fatherhood, it was about leverage. Nathaniel knew then that this was no longer just about love. It was about protecting the girls from a man who saw them as bargaining chips. The case was filed in Los Angeles, where Caleb had been living sporadically. Courtrooms are supposed to be places of truth, but for Nathaniel it felt like entering a battlefield where love had to be translated into legal arguments. The opposing lawyer painted Caleb as a man who had fallen on hard times, but was ready to step up as a father. They spoke of second chances of redemption, weaving a narrative designed to tug at the judge's sympathy. Nathaniel sat rigid, his jaw clenched, while Caleb played his role with ease. He shook his head mournfully when the girls' names were mentioned, as though grief had kept him away rather than neglect. David rose to counter. He brought in teachers who testified that the twins had often arrived at school hungry before Clara's death left without pickup, sometimes missing days entirely. Neighbors told stories of Caleb disappearing for weeks, leaving Clara alone to raise the children. Still, the courtroom air was thick with uncertainty. Nathaniel could feel the tide shifting each time Caleb's lawyer invoked the phrase biological parent. The law was on his side, at least on paper. Then came the testimony that changed everything. Frank Delgado, a janitor from Caleb's old apartment complex, had overheard Caleb in a bar bragging about how he didn't want the kids, only the billionaire's money. Frank's words were steady, unwavering, and they cut through Caleb's performance like a blade. For a brief moment, Nathaniel allowed himself to breathe. Surely the truth was enough. Surely love would matter more than blood. But the judge's gavel told another story. Pending further investigation, she ruled the children will be placed in transitional foster care. The words echoed like a sentence. Grace's hand slipped from Nathaniel's as officials led them out, Lily crying into her sister's shoulder. Nathaniel called after them, his voice breaking, but the courtroom swallowed his protest. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. Not in the way a deal might collapse or a fortune might dwindle, but in the way a father feels when his children are taken from him. That night, his penthouse was unbearable. The silence screamed at him. Grace's drawings still lay scattered on the coffee table, Lily's stuffed bunny perched on the arm of the couch. He picked it up, holding it as though it might anchor him to the memory of their small arms around his neck. He had built a life where he could lose billions and still recover, but the loss of those girls was different. It hollowed him. David called his tone steady. "This isn't over," he said. "We'll gather more evidence, build a stronger case. But you need to understand, Nathaniel, the system leans toward family reunification. We'll have to fight harder than you've ever fought before." Nathaniel stared out at the city lights, their glow blurred through his tears. He had promised Clara once that he would never let her go without. He had broken that promise. Now he had another chance not to save her, but to save her daughters. The custody storm had begun, and Nathaniel knew there would be no compromise. It wasn't about money, reputation, or power anymore. It was about keeping Grace and Lily safe, about proving that love wasn't measured by biology, but by presence, by sacrifice, by the willingness to show up every single day. He had lost them once already. He would not lose them again. The weeks after Grace and Lily were taken into foster care were the longest of Nathaniel Cole's life. He moved through his days like a man underwater, every sound muffled, every step heavy. His penthouse, once a symbol of achievement, had turned into a mausoleum of absence. Grace's drawings were still pinned to his refrigerator, Lily's little shoes by the door, Mr. Button's resting quietly on the couch. He refused to move any of it, afraid that if he did, their presence would slip away completely. He couldn't sleep without replaying the image of their tear-streaked faces as they were led out of court. But what haunted him more than anything was the echo of Clara Jennings's words in her journal. "If I can't be here, I pray someone will remember the promise we once made." David Lawson, ever pragmatic, continued building the case. He called in new witnesses, gathered financial records, tracked Caleb Harlow's movements with the diligence of a man who knew the system rewarded persistence. What finally cracked the storm open was a series of credit card statements showing Caleb's bar tabs and hotel stays, many dated, during weeks when he had claimed to be reconnecting with his daughters. Added to Frank Delgado's testimony, the evidence painted a clear picture. Caleb was not a man fighting to reclaim his children. He was a man fighting for leverage. The final hearing in Los Angeles carried a weight that felt biblical. Nathaniel sat at the plaintiff's table, shoulders squared, his heart pounding with every word. Caleb tried to bluster to wave away the evidence, but his performance faltered. Witness after witness described neglect, absence, and manipulation. One teacher spoke about Grace falling asleep in the class after nights when no adult had been home. A neighbor recounted watching Lily sit on the front steps for hours, waiting for a father who never showed. When David presented the financial statements, the room grew so silent that Nathaniel could hear his own pulse. Caleb's defense unraveled in front of him. The judge leaned forward, her tone grave. "This court's responsibility is to act in the best interest of the children. Mr. Harlow, your actions demonstrate instability and disregard for parental duty. Effective immediately, custody is awarded to Mr. Cole. Mr. Harlow's visitation rights are suspended pending further evaluation." The gavel struck, and with it came the sound of a new beginning. Nathaniel stood slowly, as though afraid the moment might dissolve if he moved too quickly. Grace and Lily were ushered in from a side room, their small feet pattering across the polished floor. The instant they saw him, they broke into a run, colliding into his arms with such force he staggered back. Lily buried her face in his chest, while Grace whispered through sobs, "We knew you'd come." For the first time in his life, Nathaniel cried openly, unashamed, holding on to the only family he would ever need. Back in New York, life shifted in ways Nathaniel hadn't anticipated. His penthouse, once immaculate and cold, blossomed into something alive. He converted his formal dining room into a playroom lined with bookshelves and art supplies. The grand piano in the corner became a backdrop for messy art projects. Sundays turned into pancake mornings, flour dusting his expensive counters, while Lily giggled at his clumsy attempts to flip them. Grace, ever serious, became his helper, reading recipes aloud and correcting him when he forgot ingredients. Evenings were no longer filled with conference calls. Instead, he sat on the living room floor, listening to stories about school, laughing at knock-knock jokes, tucking the girls in with promises that tomorrow would be better. Yet Nathaniel knew this transformation wasn't just about daily routines. It was about legacy. He had built skyscrapers, expanded empires. But what did it matter if the people he loved slipped through the cracks? Clara's journal had changed him. Her faith in him, even in his absence, demanded more than comfort or wealth, it demanded action. So he established the Clara Jennings Foundation, dedicated to funding medical care for families at risk of preventable illnesses like the one that had taken her life. He poured millions into it, not as an act of charity, but as an act of remembrance. Every clinic that opened, every child treated, was another piece of the promise fulfilled. One autumn afternoon, Nathaniel took the girls to Central Park. The leaves were fiery red and gold, drifting down in slow spirals. He carried a letter in his pocket, written not on company stationery, but on the same kind of lined paper Clara had used in her journal. They walked together to a quiet corner where a small headstone bore her name. Nathaniel knelt with the girls beside him and began to read aloud. Clara, I failed you once, but I will not fail again. Your daughters are safe. They are loved. I promise to raise them with the same courage you gave me when I was a boy. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every laugh we will carry you with us. Grace squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face, while Lily leaned against his shoulder, whispering, We miss you, Mommy. In that moment, Nathaniel understood redemption. It was not about erasing the past or undoing mistakes. It was about living differently now, about showing up, about making love the currency of his life instead of power. He had spent decades chasing numbers on a screen, but what gave him purpose was hearing two little girls call him Dad. As winter approached, the Cole household prepared for its first Christmas together. The girls insisted on decorating every corner of the penthouse. Ornaments hung crookedly from chandeliers, paper snowflakes taped to windows, stockings stretched across the marble fireplace. On Christmas morning, Nathaniel woke to the sound of laughter. Grace and Lily stood at the foot of his bed, holding a wrapped gift. He opened it to find a simple wooden frame. Inside was the photograph of Clara, surrounded by drawings of clouds and stars. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, were the words, Now you're our angel too. Nathaniel held the frame as tears slipped down his cheeks. It wasn't wealth or status or reputation that defined his life anymore. It was the chance to keep a promise, to turn regret into love, to build a legacy that mattered. Looking at Grace and Lily, he felt something he had never known before. Not victory, not success, but peace. And as the camera of life seemed to linger on that Christmas morning, Nathaniel's story carried a question for everyone who heard it. What promise have you kept or broken that changed your life? Share it, because sometimes the smallest vow can alter the course of everything. If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Pass it on so others remember that redemption is always possible, and that love once chosen can turn even the heaviest ghosts into light. Nathaniel Cole's story began as one of silence, ambition, and buried pain. For decades, he built his life around power and wealth, believing that the walls of his empire would shield him from the memories of his childhood. But beneath the marble floors and glass towers, there was always a boy who once swore he would never let the one person who saved him suffer. Clara Jennings had been his anchor, his protector, his light in the darkest years of his youth. And though he tried to forget, fate refused to let him. It came back to him in the most unexpected and heartbreaking way through two little girls on a city street. Grace and Lily stopped his limousine that morning with nothing more than a worn photograph and a request that pierced straight through his carefully constructed armor. Can you write a letter to our mom in heaven? What seemed at first like a strange encounter quickly became the moment that turned his entire world upside down. The photograph revealed what his heart wasn't ready to face. Clara was gone. The woman who had once saved his life had left behind daughters who now stood in front of him, carrying both her smile and her sorrow. From that instant, Nathaniel's life was no longer about boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. He found himself stepping into the fragile, chaotic, and painfully honest world of two children trying to survive without their mother. Their lives were filled with small acts of courage, stretching meals, holding each other through the night, writing letters to the sky as if their mother could still hear them. And with every moment he spent with them, Nathaniel was reminded of the promise he had once made to Clara, a promise he had broken, but now had a chance to honor in a new way. The fight that followed was not just about guardianship, it was about redemption. Caleb Harlow, their absent biological father, re-emerged with claims of parental rights. The courtroom became a battlefield, forcing Nathaniel to face not only legal challenges, but also his own deepest fears that he might lose the very people who had given his life new meaning. For a time, it seemed as though he had failed again as Grace and Lily were placed in foster care. But Nathaniel refused to give up. He gathered testimony evidence and most of all the truth of his devotion to the girls. In the end, it was not his wealth that won the battle, but his relentless presence, his love, and his commitment to being the father they had lost. The reunion was transformative. Grace and Lily did not simply come into his home, they transformed it. The sterile mansion became alive with laughter, pancake breakfasts, bedtime stories, and drawings taped on the walls. Nathaniel, the man once defined by cold ambition, now learned the small rituals of fatherhood, braiding hair, kissing scraped knees, listening to fears whispered in the dark. And in the process he discovered that redemption isn't found in grand gestures but in showing up every single day. The lesson of Nathaniel Cole's story is both simple and profound. Promises matter. They matter not only when life is convenient, but especially when it is hard. We all carry promises we've broken, regrets we've buried, and people we've lost along the way. But his journey teaches us that it is never too late to make things right. Not by erasing the past, but by building a different future. Love, responsibility, and presence are choices we can make today regardless of yesterday's failures. For those watching this story is a reminder to look at your own life. Is there someone waiting for your presence? A child who needs your attention more than your money? A friend or sibling you once promised to stand by? Redemption is not about perfection. It is about showing up now, even if you didn't before. The legacy we leave is not in our titles or our bank accounts, but in the lives we touch, the promises we keep, and the love we choose to give. Nathaniel's transformation from a lonely billionaire to a devoted father shows us that even in the face of broken promises, there is always a chance to redeem ourselves. His life became proof that wealth is measured not in dollars but in love. His story is a call to each of us to live with courage, to honor the people who believed in us, and to turn our regrets into reasons to love harder. And now, it's your turn. What promise do you need to keep today? Who in your life needs you to show up for them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Because your story could inspire someone else to choose love over indifference. If this story moved, you don't just leave quietly. Support this channel so we can continue sharing powerful stories that remind us of what truly matters. Hit the subscribe button right now, leave a like, and turn on notifications. Every action you take helps us bring more stories of hope, love, and redemption to light. Together, we can create a community that believes in second chances and in keeping the promises that define us.